Okie dokie, I think we're ready. Good evening, everyone in the room and online, and welcome. It's a cold night, and for those of us who are here in County Hall, I think we'd like to get home while the grit's still on the road. So, Nick, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies.
But I suspect that Councillor John will not be logging on from Finland, but you never know. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, if we can go on to the first substantive item on the agenda, the National Collaborative Arrangements for Welsh Local Authority Adoption and Fostering Services. Tudor, would you like to lead us in on this?
Okay, thank you, Leader. Diolch ar arweinydd. Yes, the National Collaborative Arrangements for Welsh Local Authority Adoption and Fostering Services. And this comes under the National Adoption Service for Wales and Foster Wales. And it's obviously primarily about enhancing governance and leadership. I don't propose to go through the paper in detail, but obviously I just want to be clear what we've been asked here. And basically it is to provide you, the Cabinet, and other members with information regarding the proposal for developing the governance and enabling structures for the National Adoption Service for Wales as it assumes responsibility for Foster Wales. And secondly, to seek agreement for Monmouthshire County Council to sign the joint committee arrangement for the proposed joint committee between the 22 local authorities in Wales and the Welsh Local Government Association, WLGA. And basically the agreement sets out the arrangements in relation to the manner in which the council will work together and use the joint committee to deliver the specified and agreed functions set out by the Adoption and Children Act 2002, which is a joint adoption arrangement, and provide a framework for the parties to give effect to the coordination of identified foster service functions across Wales. And obviously that agreement is Appendix 1. Without going into the very great detail, basically the National Adoption Service, NAS, it was set up in 2014, and what it's allowed is significant change and improvement in adoption services across Wales because it is a national structure. And a review in 2018 led to proposals to actually streamline governance and improve accountability. And when you look at the governance, it is fairly complicated to make sure that it is legal and obviously above board. And certainly now it is operating fairly well. Certainly during COVID, there have been issues, less children being adopted, less parents coming forward for adoption. But that was almost inevitable, as a result of COVID. This agreement is more or less, it's really almost like a done deal between the 22 authorities. And we're certainly not talking about huge amounts of money in terms of what is being asked for. But in a nutshell, by having a national organisation, it does make greater efficiency, it does make for better placement, and there's a national adoption register so that children can be adopted from different parts of Wales. And unfortunately, for some children, they have to be adopted by parents out of their home area for valid safety and safeguarding reasons. I think we're talking ballpark, and I think perhaps if Peter wants to come in on this, but it's about, for the NAS part, it's about 500,000 split up between the 22 LEAs. There's a lack of clarity there in terms of actually how much we pay, and it's something like 400,000 for the Maethu Cymru, the foster element of the organisation. Obviously, there are some downsides to having a national organisation, but overall, there are far greater upsides. And certainly, you know, since I've taken on this role, my intention is to work with the two organisations to obviously increase adoption and to increase the number of foster parents, but to do it at, yes, a national level, but also a local level, because that is what people identify with. So, you know, other than that, the proposal, the strong proposal, is that we agree to this, and it is top sliced. It'd be incredibly difficult to try and pull that back, but that you know, we agree with this and you know, and continue to be part of it. And obviously, I will make sure that we are having sort of value for money from the two organisations. So other than that, I'll stop.
Thanks very much, Tudor. That makes a lot of sense to me. You want to come in, Martin, please?
I got one question, if
Yeah.
I may. I like the idea of an all Wales organisation.
Yes.
A lot of strengths in that, but I do notice that there are 3 independent organisations remaining: Adoption UK, Barnardo's Cymru, and St David's Children's Society.
Yes.
What's the rationale for keeping these 3 separate from the national?
Yeah, I'm not you know, to be absolutely honest, I'm not really sure, but obviously within fostering and adoption provision, there are very strong private groups like Barnardo's, and I don't know if Jane would like to come in on this, because she's obviously got better, you know, on the ground knowledge of this. So hand over to Jane, the Chief Officer.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. I can assist with the answer to that question. So the National Adoption Services for Wales work closely with some voluntary adoption services, the ones that Councillor Grocott picked up. These provide a very specialist adoption service, working closely in partnership with the National Adoption Service for children who are what we would describe as very difficult to find adoptive parents for. So they may be children with disabilities, sibling groups, or older children who present with more complex or trauma-based needs. So whilst the majority of children who require adoption services can be accommodated within the National Adoption Service and its partners, there remains a real need for these very niche private voluntary sector adoption agencies, and it's a well sort of understood partnership through SLAs, etc., that we engage with through the National Service with these voluntary sector organisations who have a real specialism in this area. I hope that assists.
Thanks.
Thanks, that was a useful addition. Councillor Figgs, Catherine.
Thank you. Having problems unmuting there, apologies. Thank you, Councillor Grocott. I wanted to ask about where we are in Monmouthshire in terms of, are there waiting lists for both adopted parents and children in Monmouthshire, and how that compares to other local authorities? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Again, I think I'll hand over to Jane. One thing I would say is that we've had, for want of a better word, a very good month or so in terms of recruiting foster carers. We've had something like 17 live inquiries, and obviously that won't translate into 17 foster parents, because people will drop out. They might not have sufficient room, or you know, they might not pass, you know, the assessments. And we've got something like 3 people who've now just been approved, and we've benefited greatly by John Lewis, of all people. As probably people, you might well have seen their Christmas advert at the moment, is very much on a family taking on a young child, and the prospective foster dad is trying to learn to skateboard, which I dread to think how I would fare on that. I would say overall, every authority in Wales is finding it more and more difficult to recruit foster parents and rely on. I thought it was an animal, an IFA, you know, but it's an independent foster agency, because at times, you know, we can't find them. I do feel very strongly, and only having come into this in the last 6 months, but I feel very strongly that, and I've set up a task and finish group now with Children's Services to actively recruit foster parents. And Councillor Angela Sanders and I've been to 1 or 2 events, but I feel it's the local element linked to the national, but the two go hand in hand. But I hand over to Jana, the Chief Officer, can perhaps put a bit more sort of meat on the bone there.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. So in terms of children waiting for adoption, there is always a number of children within our, or normally speaking, there's a few children who are waiting for adoption. As you can imagine, it's quite a lengthy process. Last year, we had 9 children complete on adoption, and the numbers can vary, you know, quite considerably actually year on year, just depending which children come into our care. The overall performance around numbers of children waiting, numbers of available adoptive carers, how long children wait, are figures that are regularly reviewed and monitored through our regional South East Wales adoption services. And then the overall then region by region figures are represented within the National Adoption Service annual report. So although I don't know the exact numbers of children who are currently waiting, I know I can assure Cabinet that these are figures that are regularly reviewed. So children, length of time waiting, the numbers of children within the system waiting to sort of proceed towards adoption are all routinely and regularly monitored and reviewed. And I would say that broadly speaking, there are more children waiting for adoption than there are adoptive parents waiting for children.
Thank you, Jane. Do we have any other comments or observations, Cabinet? If not, yes.
Just that having looked at the annual report of the service, that it all is most impressive, and I'm really glad that we are maximising the number of new recruits to fostering and adoption for children in Monmouthshire, and it was been great to see the engagement events and the communications programme that's been put around to recruit foster parents locally, and which hopefully could be repeated.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, Angela and I as well, we've been trying to raise awareness. I'm going with, you know, my lanyard, etc. And Martin's got one. He can be my model. But you know, without really to a point where White House has shown some interest in possibly becoming a foster parent.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I think that's good. The other thing I would say, I very much recommend, if you've got a board moment when you're not looking at the budget, etc., but you know, the annual report, an easy read summary for all ages. And Roddiad Hawdd, I dash any bob oed. So you know, it's quite a quick. It is very good actually, so that you know, children could actually look at that. So I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, Tudor. I think we all need some light relief. I might take you up on that one. And more to the point, thank you for all the work you are doing on raising the profile of fostering. I think we know for vulnerable children, fostering will always be a better option than being a cared for child by the authority. And I really applaud you for raising its profile within the council, setting up a task and finish group. And also I would hope next year that we'll start to see the fruits of this work. So can we now move to the recommendation, which is for we agree that we sign the joint committee agreement. Are we all in favour, Cabinet? Thank you very much. we can move on to item 4, which is revenue and capital budget monitoring, the month 6 forecast. And to this item, I welcome Councillor Neil Alistair, Chair of the Scrutiny Performance. Very pleased you could come, Alistair, and very pleased if you would like to comment after the report has been given.
Happily, yeah.
Thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Ada. So you have the month 6 forecast in front of you. You're aware, haven't read it, that the headline is our in-year shortfall has increased from 8.8 million to 9.1 million. That's a deterioration of 355,000. And again, I've said it to you as colleagues quite a lot recently. We're not alone. I could list councils up and down Wales, in England and in Scotland that have announced both similar and larger shortfalls. None of those councils, I believe, deserve singling out or naming in this meeting, as they are also dealing with the same financial crisis. Similarly, I could list council leaders, both Labour and Conservative, who've been calling for additional funding from Westminster to avert a crisis in public funding. And that funding would again translate into violent consequential spur. We need to be really clear that this is not just a Monmouthshire problem. This is not a Wales problem. This is a UK public finance problem. However, we need to consider clearly and accurately, and with the view to balancing our shortfall in our budget and looking at our forecast. So, to the report, the principles pressures remain as they were in the month 4 outturn. In these areas, we're now seeing a further increase of £880,000 within children's services, which brings us to a £4.4 million overspend. It's an increase of 194,000 in meeting the needs of the homeless, bringing that to a 1.5 million overspend. These are offset by a number of favourable movements, significantly in the level of ongoing staff vacancies being carried or held in the workforce. The report provides you with a key breakdown of the key background to the financial situation that we are in, and that shows that last year's budget has seen its risks realised and surpassed in areas such as social care, children's services, and staff costs associated with the increased pay offer, which is linked to the real living wage. Table 2 within your report provides a full breakdown of the increased pressures and savings. It's notable that the council has achieved its saving targets were laid down in its original 22 to 23 budget. So what are we going to do? We've got a recovery plan in the report, which you can find in table 3. It also details the need for a senior lead team to closely monitor spend and budget, particularly in key risk areas of adult services, children's services and housing. And as I said to Scrutiny Committee, I'd like to make it clear that my expectation goes much further than this, and that I expect the output of that monitoring to be presented to myself as portfolio holder regularly and reported to Cabinet. Our recovery plan includes a £5 million use of revenue reserves, 1.27 million from the capitalisation directive, and 700 million from additional funding. We're looking at cost moderation and reduction services for 2.185 million. I've iterated previously when talking in month 4 that risk remains, and we don't expect a smooth ride to the end of this financial year. We need to be aware that matters have the potential to deteriorate further. As such, the report summarises the key risks which remain and are likely to impact on the budget further. You'll find this in section 4, which is the ongoing budgetary risks. And at my own risk of sounding like a broken record, these include additional community needs for council services as a result of the cost of living crisis, which affects our own residents, and ongoing hangover pandemic impact in the needs for council services, and those particularly around those areas of homelessness, children's services, adult social care, and children's additional learning needs. In terms of what are we going to do when those hit? Unfortunately, the report isn't positive. There's very little scope for further savings in financing and treasury budgets in light of the rising interest rate environment. Additionally, our overall outturn position continues to be supported by 2.65 million of identified and eligible expenditure, which will be funded from capital receipts, using our capital receipts directly. We can't rely on those mitigations long term. They're very much short-term measures, and it's not currently sustainable at this level beyond our 22-23 budget, as capital receipts forecasts to be generated are going to start to fall away. It is therefore imperative that we do deliver the cost moderations in the recovery plan, and that we do closely monitor this budget progress to year end. We need to make a note on our use of reserves. As I've said, we are looking at using a 5 million drawdown. I'm going to cast the graph on the report that you have seen. Okay, so this is where you are. What you're looking at is a chart which shows the use of reserves and position from 2008, which you will recall is the point of the last financial recession in the UK. You'll see a downward trend can be found throughout from 2008 to 2020, showing that over those years the council has run down reserves during the years of austerity. You'll see this bump here, which shows the rise to 26.6 million, and that is indicative of where the council was able to rebuild its reserves position temporarily due to Welsh Government funding. So we're not in a great position in reserves. We're the third lowest in Wales. Wherever councils are looking to dip into reserves, we're already at a previously depleted position. If we put 5.5 million in and then forecast that that's not going to be put back in 23 and 24, which our medium-term financial planning indicates we're not going to be in a position to do due to the size of that shortfall. What we're looking at, and I will lift that there.
Yes, you should.
Is 23-24 will put us at a £16.6 million.
Could I just check that everybody can see this graphic online?
No,
Great.
yeah, it's not visible.
Yes, we can. Some
Okay.
people with low bandwidth probably cannot.
That's telling for us.
So
Sorry,
yeah,
I didn't want to.
so essentially, we assume that we will not be able to rebuild those reserves and we carry on this trajectory. We're looking at £16.6 million in reserves in 23 and 24. You'll note that this is still above the low point of previously tolerated reserves in 2018 to 2019. However, we need some context here. I believe the 23.6 million here in 2008, 2009 gave us something in the region of 18.9% of our budget. Here we're looking, sorry, 18.5. Here we're looking at about 14.9% of our budget. So the messages on reserves is they are very finite and very reduced. So on that bleak picture, I now need to turn your attention to another, and that's schools. During the pandemic, we saw additional Welsh Government funding for bringing all schools into surplus budgets. You'll recall from the previous administration that 3 schools prior to the pandemic were in deficit. I believe the current leader of the opposition stated at the time in South Wales Argus that his priority was not at that time balancing the books. Unsurprisingly now, Welsh Government funding's dried up post-pandemic and the financial legacies returned, and this report identifies that 7 schools are likely to be entering deficit by year end. I do note that the previous leader of the Labour group in the same article was quoted as saying that if schools had received year-on-year fund increases in line with inflation, this situation would have been mitigated. Moreover, when we look at this year's budget, which we currently have, that transferred its risk for any pay rise above 3% for schools directly into schools' budgets, which required those schools to meet significant cost of living increases for their staff. And again, at that point, when we set that budget, inflation, which was the CPI annual rate, hit 7%. That wouldn't have been published at the time, but the January figures there would have shown a 5.5% rate of inflation. And every indication there was showed that inflation was climbing rapidly, and that pay rise was not necessarily a realistic expectation to be used in the financial modelling. So that's where we are. I'm now going to hand you back to Marianne to talk about, well, I'll let you possibly do that after Alistair's talks. I don't know when you want to do that, to ask us to talk about the recommendations, because they're moderately extensive and I don't want to talk you out, and you can probably hear me croaking already.
Absolutely, I might join you with the croaking. I'll bring in Alistair at this point because this has already been to Scrutiny Committee, and I'm sure you have some observations that you would like to share with Cabinet.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to Cabinet Member for the outline of the report. I should also start by saying that Tudor might be pleased to know that I started the meeting in Welsh with the magical use of Bore Da. So, you know, I'm making progress step by step. And in the course of the last 3 weeks, I have learned Rani Am Ohid, and I'm so keen on it. I never grew up with it, so it's a most wonderful song. I love it. And I've had to research Magnus Maximus, but anyway, it's a wonderful song.
To the concert.
So I'm making a little bit of progress, Tudor. To the report itself, we considered the report, and it is worth noting that, you know, I did start the meeting by thanking Peter Davis and John Davis and the team, the finance team, for bringing forward at my request from the previous meeting the importance of actually not having a 2-month or 2.5-month delay on looking at the position of the budget, and really grateful for the amount of work that would have involved. It's really been very helpful to be looking at month 6 and not month 5, which otherwise would have been the case. And also congratulating Jonathan on his appointment as permanent appointment to the role of Head of Finance, which is good to know. We've got some really very strong people in these positions in finance. Yeah, we observed, and I think Rachel, you've noted a couple of these points, but if I may, we've noticed the deterioration of spend from the month 4 report. It's now reached forecast 9.15 million, and as you've just heard, that's breaking down into particularly pressures in children's services and homelessness budgets. And there was some reference to in the plan, the description of a robust recovery plan, against which there were some questions raised, as it appears that 6.27 million of that robust recovery plan, quotes, is by the use on application of reserves and capitalisation, and a further 0.7 million from one-off new grant funding, and 2.18 million through some form of service redesign, which actually appears to be more about unfilled vacancies. So in terms of the robustness of the plan, those appeared to be one-off measures, and so there was some concern expressed around whether that was robust or whether it was actually taking forward a reduced expenditure that could avoid a cliff edge by the time we get as a council to the end of this financial year. It was recognised that, and you've just heard, I think Richard's just outlined the reserves position. They were replenished by £11 million to a high of 26.6 million, which was, as you've just seen, was the highest point since 2008. And it's recognised that those reserves alone would not be sufficient to be able to bridge the challenge and the gap that has appeared for next year. But it's worth noting that they and it was noted at the meeting that they were the highest since 2008. There were concerns over the ability of the council to be able to use council tax as a means to deal with that gap, and the developing discussion in England around the new cap of 5%. So there were some references to what might be the current plans for the administration in terms of council tax for next year, given that 5% appears to be what English councils are gathering around, though it's too early to know, and we won't know until late February or early March. They appear to be doing so. It was noted that with the school balances forecasting still a surplus of just over 2 million, does that take into account the pressure on energy expenditure, which we'd be expecting over the winter period? And Will and I attended the schools forum meeting, I think it was last week, Will, where I was asking school heads really how they were anticipating energy affecting their budgets. And I think it would be fair to say, Will, that they were still at a very early stage of making those estimates, which I read as they're not yet able to determine just to what extent expenditure above budget on energy consumption in the schools would affect their budgets. But yeah, the further 7 schools forecast to fall into deficit by the year end was clearly a degree of concern, and the question arose how that deficit would be funded at the end of the year. I also attended the South Wales Fire and Rescue briefing this morning, which was really outlining that they, of course, are also dealing with these tremendous pressures, but they now developed their plans and they're moving those through for formal consideration. So the point that has been made, well made, that every council in the country is under pressure with budgets. Really, the councils that are going to come through this best of all are likely to be the ones who plan early and take action early rather than waiting too long. And it was raised at the meeting that the next 3-year position really is very important, because next year, 23-24, looks like being a very high spike in pressure, which falls down very substantially in 24-25 and 25-26. And whether or not we are able to plan through that period, because one very high spike year, it's important that we don't destroy what we've got or damage what we've got to the extent that in future years we actually regret it. So it's more important than ever to be able to look through that period, that 3-year period, and retain really excellent services. How we do that becomes the challenge. But it is not a continuous very high spike in terms of the formal UK forecasts. And whether or not pressure can be exerted on the Welsh Government to assist in that regard by either presenting reserve cover or some form of additional support to enable councils such as ours to be able to work through a 3-year period, as opposed to simply deal with an extremely difficult next year, and how we deal with that. Finally, Leader, we did mention the overspend in social care, and yet we noted that in last month's safeguarding and social care report by the director, Jane, that there were 2,000 hours of unmet need, unmet care per week. Excuse me. And that puts us in a very challenging position. And is this something of a conversation that was raised at the meeting that we need to have with our residents to understand that there is a lot of unmet care and that the pressure of the budgets could make that situation even worse, so that residents actually need to be realistic wherever that's possible about their understanding and expectations of what the council can do, because clearly those trajectories look very concerning. So those would be my overall references, Leader, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. You've raised some salient points that certainly show us that the collective minds of the council, focusing on our biggest challenges, is really benefiting the whole of the work of the council. So thank you very much. You also raise some points that would you like to reply to before I open it up to Cabinet?
Sorry, I wasn't taking notes on those points to
That's fine.
prepare a response. Sorry,
I think it will come out anyway, since many of the issues that you raised, like the 2,000 hours of unmet care, and that we need to engage in frank and open conversations with the citizens of Monmouthshire, are well made and I think well understood across Cabinet and across Council. We are fortunate, I think, in Monmouthshire that we have an active citizenship who are ready to step up and engage in very honest conversations, and that has been the case in previous budgets, which may not be as challenging as this one, but certainly have been challenging. Cabinet, is there anything you would like to add here?
Can I just say something, in terms of the 2,000 hours, of unmet care? It is an issue that affects all authorities, and the key problem that we have is the problem of recruitment of particularly domiciliary care workers, that we're not able to care them. We have a brokerage system where it goes out to brokerage to find carers from particular private providers. But it is very, very challenging at the moment, and the whole job market is challenging. And this the other thing that I would say is we are incredibly challenged by the rurality of the authority of the county, in that down to the point where some people live in very rural areas, up steep mountains, where one needs a four-wheel drive vehicle to get up there, and we don't possess them. But that is a relatively minor issue. It is this issue of recruitment and retention of particularly domiciliary care workers and of travelling between visits, etc. And that is a huge challenge. And we're certainly finding an increase in demand for social care, which obviously, as much as we can as a service, we're trying to meet.
Thank you very much, Tudor. I think that is worth putting it in context, and a context which is, I think, being faced every day within the Social Care Directorate. Before we move on to recommendations, Councillor Taylor, Francis, you've made 3 questions that you would like answered. Can we take them one by one?
Yes, please, Leader. So yeah, the questions that I've posed are, so firstly, one notes the net deterioration in the month 6 budget position, and that it says that this is offset by a number of movements, or favourable movements. I'm not sure I would describe them as such, but significantly the level of ongoing staff vacancies being carried or held in the workforce. What I'm asking, Leader, is that we quantify the number and type of vacancies that we are carrying as a council, because that by the budget movement would seem to be quite a large number of vacancies. I think it would be helpful for everybody to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Genuinely, thank you for asking this question. I think it's a really important question. So you'll be able to see through the website that we've got 36 vacancies advertised, which are the vacancies that we intend to fill. And those are 13 teaching posts. And there's also social workers, a driver, a deputy registration officer, and a fitness class instructor. But I appreciate what you're asking is what we're not filling at the moment. That is much harder to quantify at the moment. The system is not entirely reliable, and we do have a high number of unoccupied posts. The system itself does show 635 unoccupied posts at this point in time. But some of those are legacy posts that will never genuinely be filled. So giving you a specific answer in terms of what genuine posts we have that we need, that we're not filling compared to what the legacy data on the system is actually really difficult to quantify. It's a question that I have asked myself, but we are at the moment hoping that once we install a new system, that we will be able to actively track that down to what actually this organisational looks like in terms of organisational capability and the number of posts we believe that we need to competently fulfil the services that we need will be in place. But at this point, I don't believe we're in a position to actually articulate that without some significant work.
Thank you. You have a second question now, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, so the second question really is obviously related to the fact that, I mean, obviously, and I appreciate what Councillor Garrick says about actually being very, very difficult for us to articulate that. But I guess I'm obviously concerned, and, you know, without suggesting that the actual number is around that 635, that's a lot of vacancies, whichever way we look at it. And I'm wondering, in respect of these vacancies, and also noting the use of agency staff in particular, and for example, in social care and other places, what comprehensive assessment do we have of the risk that this authority is currently carrying? And when I'm talking about risk, I'm talking about risk in its broader sense, obviously, and noting also, I guess, what Councillor Neil was saying in the terms of the observations from scrutiny, risks in respect of not recruiting now, leaving ourselves with, you know, without those, you know, when actually we need to be running comprehensive services over the long term, despite the challenges that we face with now. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, I think this is a really useful question. Thank you. So as of today, we're at 52 agency staff being utilised in the council. That varies daily. It's mostly social care and health and communities and social care and health and communities in place that those agency staff are placed in. They generally deal with shortages of personnel at pinch point roles and pinch point roles for recruitment. So we may sometimes take on agency staff where we're finding it difficult to recruit somebody and use that as a short-term solution. Strategically, we're continuing to try and reduce that number of agency workers. And what we have done as part of the budget process that we're going through at the moment is to ask for all of our assessments to be risk assessed, to include that risk as well. So we're able to actually quantify and get a handle on that as cabinet in what we actually bring to council in terms of the budget as well.
Thank you, Councillor Garrick.
Marianne, final one.
So I was going to say, so just to say, and sorry, I missed a little bit of what you said because I'm afraid my signal is not fantastic, but I just wanted to say I'm talking about really broad risks in respect of, you know, risks in terms of pressure on other members of staff, risks to services, risks to you know, residents. I don't know. I don't want to give you specific scenarios, but I'm just wondering, and I'm not, you know, it would be really helpful perhaps to have some wider sense of this, Councillor Garrick, as I guess this is a matter for the whole of council. How quickly we'll be able to see something like that in due course. But yeah, my final question is around, so sitting alongside that risk that we're holding is what progress on, I've heard mention of a people strategy to run right alongside the budget process and really help us with some of this long-term planning, please. Thank you.
So yeah, and again, I find it a useful strategy. People question the people strategy is something that I asked about. It's one of the first things when I entered this portfolio position. So it doesn't run as part of the budget. It runs sort of in line from the corporate and community and corporate plan, and it runs along with sort of strategies including digital and asset management. So work has started. I did ask for that early doors, and we expect to be able to put that forward in the summer.
Thank you.
Leader, sorry, can I just, sorry, when you say work has started, Councillor Garrick, am we to take it that it's not terribly far advanced? Because if we're not expecting that to at least, are you suggesting we'll see first sight of it in the summer, Councillor Garrick?
That's my anticipation. Matt, would you be able to qualify if that's correct?
Hi, councillors, and for those watching from home, Matt Phillips, Chief Officer People and Governance. So, no, a lot of work has been done because part of the change to the people strategy that I'm looking to wrap up in this round to follow, along with the other supporting strategies like digital and asset management, the things that always follow community and corporate plan, is a consolidation of all of the policies and guidance that we have. It's one of those pieces of grit in the system, I suppose, that it can be quite difficult to for managers to alight on the correct policies and what have you, because while they're all contained on the intranet and they're available, what I'm effectively looking to do is mirror what we have in the Constitution, which is a single stop shop, which gives us the kind of the guidance in terms of how things should work, and do that with the people strategy. So that piece of work has done a huge amount of lifting and shifting and moving stuff into a single place. The introductory strategy element of it very much relies on what a huge amount of learning, and Councillor Taylor, you know, we had a back and forth about this recently as well, from what COVID has done. We've got myriad kind of feedback loops that we rely on, the people's Q&A, the leaders Q&A, the coach that we run, a whole series of different kind of entities at play. But what I need is the certainty of the community and corporate plan, and then how I need to take that and imbue that into the people strategy. So that's why it will follow, and that's why the summer deadline was the one that was just given.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Councillor Neil, I recognise you got your hand up, but Cabinet isn't like council, and unless questions are submitted in advance, we don't really have a discussion. But I am very grateful, and we all appreciate you making time to come here on behalf of Scrutiny Committee and give us your observations. Cabinet, we do have as you'd expect for a report of this substance and this importance to the running of the council, we have a number of recommendations. I'm going down with a chest infection, heavily dosed with paracetamol, so I'm not going to read them all out because I won't have a vote left by then. We have it in front of us. I will take them one by one. The first recommendation asks us just to recognise that budget forecast is showing a deterioration since month 4. And I think we all agree with that. Okay, 2.2, that we're noting that immediate action has been taken. And we have developed a robust recovery plan. Yes. And we note further the financial risk. Is that the case, Cabinet?
Absolutely.
Number 4, that we're requiring that there continues to be close monitoring and management of the operational and financial performance of the council.
Categorically.
2.5, that we recognise the ongoing risks to the financial revenue.
Totally, yes.
2.6, that we recognise the importance of a balanced outcome position being achieved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we don't get away with it legally, Cabinet, so it's not going to happen, is it? 2.7, that we note the overall budget continues to be subsidised.
Yep. With capital receipts, yeah.
Yeah. 2.8, that we note the forecast 100% delivery of the budgeted mandated savings.
Yes.
2.9, the extent of forecast movements in schools, that particular issue regarding schools, which thank you, Councillor Gareth, you extensively outlined that. 2.10, we consider the forecast capital outturn spend of 5.9 million. We agreed. With that, I conclude that item, but before doing so, I would like to thank the officers, Peter Davis and John Davis, and all the staff within the team for the amount of work that was put in to get us to this point. I'd also like to thank Councillor Gareth for the extensive oversight, but also the clarity in which she described the outturn and forecast to us. Thank you very much. So we move on to the last item on the agenda, and I bring you back in, Tudor, because we're going to now look at the Regional Integration Fund, which I think is going to figure quite highly in the work of the council as we go forward. So over to you, Tudor.
Okay, diolch yn fawr Arwain. Thank you, Leader. Yes, this paper is to consider the financial liabilities of the Regional Integration Fund and Regional Integration Funding. The key purpose of the report, and I don't intend to go through it in huge detail, but the purpose of this report is to consider the financial liabilities and implications of the RIF, as we call it, the Regional Integration Fund, and its tapered funding model. Members will need to consider and provide response to the Gwent Regional Partnership Board, the RPB, on the outcome of the consideration as to whether the council accepts or rejects the liabilities. And the key recommendations are that the council does not accept the financial liabilities and implications of the new RIF fund and its tapered funding model, that the council advocates that the Regional Integration Fund continues to be used to support the objectives of the Regional Partnership Board through allocating funds based on a process of evaluation and review on using evidence base focused on achieving best outcomes for residents of Gwent rather than a formulated tapering approach. And that, lastly, the Cabinet Member for Social Care, Safeguarding and Health, together with the Chief Officer, provides this response to the Regional Partnership Board. Without going through it in huge detail, the RIF actually provides something like £26.8 million every year to be distributed amongst the authorities within the Gwent region. And that is obviously a significant amount of money, and particularly in these challenging budgetary times. And the RIF, the prime sort of intention is that it is a key lever to drive change and transformation within the health and social care system. And RPBs are tasked or asked to consider how they deploy their collective resources, including both partnership funding and wider core resources to meet their objectives. And really a key feature of the RIF, without going through all of them, but basically it's very much based on prevention. And we've heard earlier on about increasing spends on social care. The key point of the RIF is to try and prevent people actually going into care, because that is the most cost-effective means of looking after people effectively, but importantly as well, being able to live within the budget. And if we can prevent children going into care, if we can prevent elderly people going into hospital and getting stuck there and then going into the care system, then that is obviously of benefit to the individual, which is core in my opinion. But also it is economically effective as well. And certainly over the last few years, the RIF has enabled MCC along with the other authorities in the RPB to go more for community-based care, for things like prevention, community coordination, keeping people with complex care needs closer to home, which is crucial, particularly with issues like dementia. That is a key factor, promoting good emotional health, well-being and so on. And then obviously home from hospital services to get people back into their homes and to re-enable those people to live their lives in a meaningful and pleasant way. So all of these things are incredibly important within each authority within Gwent. As a region, and obviously I sit on the RPB, but obviously my key interest is Monmouthshire. In that sense, I'm obviously interested in the other authorities in Gwent, but Monmouthshire is my key focus. And certainly the other local authorities within Gwent, they are seeking decisions now regarding a proposal not to accept the financial liabilities associated with the tapering model, because in ballpark terms, the tapering will be that we will have less money over a 3-year period. But that will then put more of a burden on each of those 5 authorities, and it obviously will have excuse me, an impact on services. 3 out of 5 have endorsed the recommendation, and 2, including Monmouthshire, remain in the decision-making process. And the Gwent picture is very reflective of the situation at a national level, with chairs of RPBs having collectively raised the issue at ministerial level. And in fact, we have a meeting tomorrow with Elena Morgan, the minister, and the deputy minister, and the deputy minister is coming in here anyway to discuss children's services. But my strong recommendation, my gut feeling, is that we need to support this and really to cut to one figure without going through all the charts, but looking at the implications for us as an authority. Over 5 years, we could lose £1 million, £1 million. So it is significant. This is not minor chaff. This is big. So my strong recommendation is that we join the other authorities and really push back on this to see if this tapering can be taken out. Really, it is a serious issue, and in terms of what we've heard tonight elsewhere in the cabinet about our financial situation, is even more important. But so that is my strong recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tudor. Are there any observations from Cabinet before we go to look at the recommendations? I'd just like to endorse what Tudor said, and in fact, this is a very clear report which lays out the negative impacts of the tapering. And one I would particularly like to emphasise, that we as a council have been committed for some time and are absolutely committed now to working for an approach to social care which is preventative, enabling, empowering and community-based. And much of this funds is what allows us to do that, because it's the non-statutory funds, which are very precious during this time of inflationary pressures, are the ones which enable us to have that forward-looking ambition, which is about being people-facing, but also protecting in a way which increases agency and allows people to have choice. So it is so important that we keep hold of that amount of money. And I'm so pleased that we're not alone, and all across Wales, local councils are making a similar point. We have 3 recommendations, Council. first one, Cabinet rather, that we do not accept the financial liabilities. Do we agree with that, Cabinet? That we advocate that it continues to be used for the objectives outlined by Tudor. Are we agreed?
Yes.
And that Tudor, along with the chief operator, the chief officer, provides that robust response. And I know we can rely on you to do so, Tudor, and I know we agree to that.
Yeah, it will be robust and it will be bilingual probably. In that order.
Even better. So on that note, we finish Cabinet. Thank you very much. Safe journey home for everybody here, and enjoy the rest of the evening, everyone else. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. You want to plug out, Martin? Yes, please.